Hello, hello.
Hey, Dimitri, how are you?
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Nice to see you.
Good to
Welcome,
see you.
Rafaela. Oh, Rafaela is muted. That's fine. That's good. Feel free to turn on your microphone and join the conversation. Let's wait for 1 minute for more people to join the conversation. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Very well. I'm excited. Very excited for the presentation today and basically the conversation. It's not a presentation, actually. Uh, I'm really curious for the case study on data scraping because I know from previous conversations in the past that you have a strong experience in doing scraping, challenging case studies. So I want to know, I want to learn from this. Oh, that's fine, Rafaela. No worries. So I want to learn from this conversation, from you, experiences, challenges, these hidden things that make the job challenging, because it's quite easy to do the scraping without the challenges, right?
Yes, and to be honest, I'm definitely no expert in scraping, but I do have a lot of experience, as you mentioned, with a lot of the edge cases having to do with it. I think that's really where that's where the challenge is. Again, as you said, the scraping part is fairly straightforward, but as it pertains to actually being able to meet the use case for the business in production reliably, that part gets tricky. And it's definitely something that we still struggle with and learn from. But scraping is definitely not our first go-to option, but sometimes it's the only option we can afford and or be able to implement what the client's going for in cases where there's no APIs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Here is where the story starts when the API is not available.
Right. Yes. Yes. And here, I'll share my screen. I've got a bit of a guide here, and I've got some code we could take a look at too.
Absolutely. Yeah. A- And Joe, if you don't mind, would you mind to share a bit more about you and the job you're doing in Albright Lab?
Yeah, definitely. So Albright Labs has been around since 2020. Started to get early on in the year, it's just right into the new year we had started up. I had worked freelance before that, same space, same type of idea. For education wise, I was educated as a mechanical engineer, so software was a bit of a switch for me, but it wasn't something I enjoyed a lot more. So, kind of spoke to what I wanted to really spend my time doing. But I've been playing with code since, seventh grade about, and mostly at that point, I was playing with HTML, PHP, CSS, those kind of things. And then getting more into stuff like React in college and that kind of thing. And it's really where I started to pique my interest a lot more. And I started to see what I could do with code. And that's really where I started putting my time into once I had finished up with school. Freelance, as I said, for about 8 years there, and then got into starting Albright Labs. And there's a few developers that work with me as well. We mostly are a back end kind of house, if you want to call it that. Most of the work we do is back end, a lot of business administrative software, usually a lot more complex integration, stuff that there might not be an existing workflow for already. We can usually come up with something that can meet the need for the client in that regard. We do a lot of front end facing stuff too, but we do lean on either developers clients have in those cases, or designers, I should say, excuse me, designers the clients have in those cases, or we have a few designers that we work with as well when the need arises. But again, most of it's back end work. Today, we're getting into a lot of AI stuff, and we have been for about the last year or so now. So we're starting to do a lot more automation around that and also using that within our workflow as well. So AI is helping us with a lot of code writing, a lot of documentation, a lot of stuff along those lines now. So it's nice to see, how much things are changing at the same time. I think everybody's interested in seeing where everything lands in that regard. But, there's
Yeah.
a little briefer on myself.
It's very interesting. And it's very nice because also, well, we know each other almost a year now. You mentioned a couple of things I didn't know about you. So it's also interesting for me. Thanks for that. Let's get started. Let's see here
Yeah,
the
so
browser automation part.
I'm going to talk about a little bit here in terms of where the actual problem was. This client had come to us having a workflow they were doing manually, and it was taking them a lot of time in order to get this accomplished. They had a staff member on this almost daily, and it was very time consuming, and it's just a lot of data entry. So it gets to be expensive when you're thinking of it from the payroll side and cost allocations in terms of having to do something data entry wise that you otherwise would think should be something that can be automated and done programmatically without the need for that. So that's where they had come to us. Now, we had worked on another project similar but very different for them previously, and that's why they had come to us asking if there's anything we could do for this. That previous project was, again, like I said, similar. They have a academy management system that they use, association management system that they're using for tracking pretty much everything. It's their CRM of sorts, if that makes sense. And they have in there all of their client information, all their contact information. And previously they were doing another manual thing where they were exporting CSV reports of specific groups within that set of customer data, client data, contacts. They would group those out, and the groups were based on who's eligible to receive XYZ email mail piece. And their email provider, the system that they're using to put out these mail pieces, is Raza IO. And so they were taking those CSVs, taking the emails out, and manually importing those in and subscribing their users. Very complex, tedious process. I mean, it's not complex, I should say, pretty simple, but tedious in the sense that we're talking hundreds of thousands of records here.
Yeah.
So, and having
Um,
to keep those in sync.
Sorry for interrupting, Joy. Just for the numbers, what was the daily or weekly number of people joining their system? So they had to do all this manual
That's
process.
a good question. Yeah. So it seemed to only be a few hundred on the side for the initial project that we were working on. So it wasn't like it was just at the point where it was getting to be just too much to actually have to handle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but
So
it's not scalable.
right, exactly. And that was a lot of what the problem was there, especially because they wanted to start doing additional mail pieces and be able to send to additional groups. And then that would require them having to manipulate all that data again and get it in to the Raza system. So what we had done for them initially in that regard was with the Nailer AMS they are using that does not have any type of API, we were able to open up the reports and write a very simple scripts that could log in, open up the report URLs once the authentication was complete, and then download using just a regular download link that they would use, the CSVs, put those over onto a server, and then the server would essentially just iterate through that list and speak with the Raza IO API to either subscribe or unsubscribe somebody based on the status in that CSV list. So that was a pretty simple project for us to do because again, data scraping pretty easy, and it wasn't even too much scraping as much of just being able to automate some kind of browser workflow. And then from there, being able to just parse the data, which is something that, pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what led them to us for this next issue that they had, which was instead of reading from Nailer, they wanted to put data into Nailer. And that opens up a whole nother, can of complexity and can of worms there. And that's kind of where we start off here with this, where they're using Cadmium in order to register individuals for an event that they have placed in Cadmium. And then individuals register. They might be staff members, they might be vendors, they might be individuals that are actually just registrants members. They needed to then have some type of intermediary system that would understand if they were vendor or staff and exclude them from the registration list in Nailer. And for the rest, carry that data and place it into Nailer. And the complex part was that they didn't just want to enter the data in one for one. They wanted to also have checks to see, does the organization exist already? Does the contact exist already? If the contact does not exist, they wanted us to have the contact created. If the contact did exist, and the data was a mismatch between the data that was in Cadmium or the data was in Nailer, they wanted to have certain fields replaced. And
Mhm.
those were like a specific list that they had come up with. And as far as if an organization didn't exist, they didn't want that created automatically, but they want to get flagged and then given to the same person who was managing this whole operation prior so that they can go ahead and manually create the organization. And I think the reason there was a bit of business logic and ensuring that the data was clean when it was being entered into the Nailer system and had the right relationships and things along those lines, which I'm sure we could have worked out even further, but we wanted to take it a little bit one step at a time here. So it kind of led us to where we were with that. Again, it was a costly process for them to kind of like do this kind of thing once you started looking at it at scale, and we started looking at what the cost would be to automate the process versus what they would be doing over the next several years of having to maintain this, especially as they're trying to do more and more events regularly throughout the year. That's when they decided, yeah, we can move forward with trying to automate out that process. There was a bit of discovery there, of course. We wanted to make sure we could do it before we had, kind of promise on anything there. So we took a little time to look through Nailer and to write a few test cases and see how much information could we get into Nailer. We knew we could log in already. We've done that for the prior project. Can we navigate more effectively than just trying to open a browser URL at that point? Could we read the data back and then make a decision and then interact with it further based on what that data was without having to re-authenticate again? And that was a little tricky because Nailer doesn't want any kind of automated processes using their system, right? So there were limitations in terms of how quick we can make a request and respond and things like that. So, a few different challenges that we had to face at that in that regard.
Yeah, the thing about the data consistency is I think in data transferring, even if it is through API, which is the most convenient way to talk with applications, even with scraping, what is the most important part is to keep the data consistent because we actually transfer. It's the same person, it's the contact, right? They join us from the CRM, and we want to transfer this contact, the same record, into a different application and then from to another application, right? And this
Correct.
thing needs to be consistent. So when in one system knows that Dimitris is working in a company, for example, and Joy is working for another company, we need this information streamlined and distributed across over the other systems, and that here's the challenge. So I want to ask you, before you write the information, are you able to validate that the information is not exist so we can give the source of truth update?
Yeah, so what we ended up doing there was essentially it's a very multifaceted process. So we had to
Okay.
kind of loop it out in stages. So to
Uh-huh.
answer your question, yes, we were able to update the content, but then it had to be a matter of searching through the system. So the way they wanted to end up doing the matching, the way they and I should say back up a second, the way we try to handle all automations is to really understand and look at exactly what steps the client, the user, whomever is performing the operation manually, really understand that process, go through it manually ourselves, see what that process is like, understand is there any steps that can be skipped here for time essence? Are there steps that are unnecessary? You want to look at the process fully and remove all the steps necessary and still result in the same outcome without any fragility. So we walked through them with that. And as part of that process, they were one, they would log into the system. They would go over to their organizations list and search the organizations list in full. They were not searching by organization name, however, they would take the attendees domain from the email address and search to see if there's any organizations in their system with that email domain or website domain already. If so, that was what gave them the thumbs up, thumbs down in terms of we needed to create an organization or we don't want to create an organization.
Mm.
And that speaks a little bit to the point of truth there because they wanted to be able to, in the event that there was no organization for that attendee, flag that and have that go onto like a daily roster, which can then be just emailed over or logged in, and the user could take a look at the administrator at the organization and see, okay, there's no orgs for this, that, the third, and then they would go and add those manually. And the interesting thing was that we have the system programmed afterwards to then retry those again in a following event once that item is marked as resolved. And we then the system knows or will expect, hey, there should be an organization now at this point. It would then retry that registration again. So by second time through, it would again go do the exact same search the client was doing. It would
Hmm.
go log into the nailer system, go over to the organization list, perform a search for the email domain specifically. And then from that point, it would then see the records in the list. Now, that does bring me just real quick to an interesting challenge we faced with that whole part. Nailer loads up all of their search results by Ajax. So the system was getting tripped up in the beginning, thinking that data is loaded, but we had an empty list. We're a load indicator in the list. So we had to find the appropriate amount of wait time based on a lot of trial and error in order for that to happen, because there was no way for us to detect that that change had completed. Um, and if we were checking it too quick, now it started flagging us as uh, trying to perform too many requests in a single minute. So we had to give it a little bit more time between those. And then the further issue there was, do sessions become inactive over that time of waiting? So there's a lot of little things here and there. But to your point, the data consistency is super important. And that spoke to why their process was the way it was prior and why we kind of modeled after that process, and then have the additional like flag and review stage for instances where data will be entered into the system for a parent most record. So not a contact or a registrant, but specifically an organization. They didn't want to start seeing their organization base get, kind of sprawled. And a big note they had, they didn't want to see duplicate organizations entered. So if there was a question if an org existed or not, they wanted to make sure a human was going to be kind of flagged and put into that loop to either, you know, do manually or then say it was resolved and just, proceed ahead. So
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. And I like the approach for keeping the data consistent here. So, because from my experience, the most common thing is recognize what is the source of truth on every time. So we put this as a source of truth, and this will be override. It's going to be the information that it's going to override the rest of the systems. But this usually doesn't, not usually, every time, it doesn't allow you to give an update from the other system to the source of truth, right?
no, that's right. And I think they wanted to, I think their thought process seemed to be that if a attendee was giving their registration information in the form they were, that was like the most updated contact
Hmm.
information for them. And I think that's why when it came to the contact level record, they were
Hmm.
comfortable with us having an automatic update process for most of the fields that are associated with the contact, other than the email, since that was kind of the thing that we were using to determine who was who, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. So you build an entire service to complete this project, right?
Yes, pretty much. So this was all done with the slides here speaks a little bit to the tech stack. So overall, we have a Laravel application that's running the entire thing. For the interfacing of that, we're using October CMS. So there's just like an interface layer, which is really minimal. All that really we have in our interface layer, and I can show a little bit of that here, is just like an event record and then like details on that event and then the list of attendees with like a status so we can like keep track of who has actually been synced over. And then we have like that issues list that like pops up if there's a matter of an organization not being found, or a matter of the API, excuse me, or a matter of the browser automation failing and it couldn't actually complete the script. It's able to flag that then so that it could be marked as resolved and reattempted, or human can pop in and see. Because there were instances we found where, since we're taking information the user's entering on the Cadmium side, there were instances where their own email address was typed in with a few, like characters incorrect. And we saw instances of like .com with two M's or two O's. So in cases like those, they would fail because we would find a domain for the org was recognized, but then when we go searching for the contact, we're unable to find that contact. But then when we search them by name, we found them. So those are programmed to be flagged separately as like a method for somebody to see there was a data inconsistency, and to your point, kind of like hone in on that and make that correction and note what was the correct bit of data.
Hmm.
That way there wasn't like two contacts with, a Joe at albrightlabs.com with two M's there and one without, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Joe, do you have any challenges in accessing the data on browser?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of the issues that we came across with that was using Puppeteer. So we relied on Puppeteer here. We used to, for a lot of these types of systems, we would do Phantom JS in order to interact with the web pages. Uh, Since that was discontinued, we've been relying on Puppeteer just because it seems to be the oldest system now that runs on nodes so that we can, have something a little more reliable than some of the newer interfaces. But as far as that was concerned, the biggest issue with that interaction was what I referenced earlier with the Ajax loading of the results, because we had to perform searches at multiple stages throughout this process. Aside from just the regular login entry of data, we then needed to search an organization's list, wait for results, read the results. And then based off of that, we then needed to get over to the events like management area. From there, search for the specific event. Again, another process of entering a search, waiting for the result back, because they use some type of the URL structure that they use within that system is not straightforward. At least it didn't seem worth us
Mm.
trying to figure out how that goes about in order to be able to hit the places we wanted to hit. And a lot of the times that we attempted doing that, we were hitting session restrictions. So it was
Oh.
essentially starting up a new session, it seemed, instead of sticking it with the same session. So we did a lot of that, like the clicking, the work through, the automation of like going through the actual AMS system manually from the side of Puppeteer manually having to do that. So again, back to the event search, wait for the results back. From that point, then we had to go into that event once it was found, perform a search to see if they've already been registered for the event or not, wait for the results back. And then we had the whole extra step after that based on those results of having to create the contact or update the contact. And again, there was another loop there of having to do the search and wait for the results back. And then we also found that there were a lot of instances where entry of the contact info would fail due to that session issue. So to get around that, what we ended up doing was having a final search again after all of those and take a look at the contact, and the local system would essentially, the system that was containing the connection between these two other operations, would then perform another search and know the contact should have been updated or created, and here's what the expected data is based on what we have. It would perform another search, get results back from that, and then make a determination if this was completed successfully or not. That really seems to be the biggest step we had, like biggest hurdle to jump here with this whole scenario, because even with the fail-safe system of being able to get the records and have like a human readable reason of why something didn't get completed as expected, we were still hitting the wall where it would happen for things that we had no expectation of. And we would run a record a second time and it was just fine because we didn't hit that session wall. So in order to get through that, that's how we kind of found, in order to make the system reliable, loop back into that process of trying to recheck the data in the AMS, see if it's what we expect it to be. If not, then flag it for reattempt. And then if it fails a second time, then we bring a human into the loop and it ends up on that sync list
Mm.
that I showed earlier. So just like a lot of weird inconsistencies with this stuff, and it has more to do with like the architecture on the other end, which is really a struggle there with that, and trying to like come up with clever ways that we can get around that without it being unreliable, if that makes sense. And I think really just to your point earlier with the data consistencies, that's like the biggest thing is just making sure that we're either made aware, is this correct? Was it done correctly? Is there any question of anything being incorrect, and being able to get someone's eyes on it to kind of make a
Mm.
determination. But that does help us and did help us train further iterations of the program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Yeah. In my work of scraping, I use a lot Puppeteer. I use also the MCP server of Puppeteer right into my cloud. So I talk to AI and tell him what I want him to do, and he goes and do the job. And yeah, the, in terms of logging in for the platforms where the highest level of security exists, is where we faced all the challenges, because after joining the platform, it's quite manageable, not easy, but it's totally manageable to recognize the elements on the interface and say, okay, now click here, click here, here is the contact name, here's the contact email, copy them, give them back.
Yes.
It depends always on security level applied from the platform you try to scrape. Uh, But yeah, it's here is where the magic of scraping comes up.
No, definitely. And to your point with Claude, huge help in this regard too, especially later on in the phases of this project, because for instances where we were having struggle instructing the script how to interact with the page, it was extremely helpful, as rudimentary as it might seem, to take the source code from the page and provide that over to Claude and say, we're trying to interact with element, and then you just give it the exact element then pulled out
Yeah.
from the code. And it was able to then update the script slightly, and we could go through iterations of changes that way in order to actually get with the result that we wanted. We did see a lot of help there specifically for the event management page, because
Mm.
the single event page had like the attendees list is on the side there. It's got a search, but the search only works with the first and last name, not at the same time. So like we had to perform a couple searches there in that regard too. But being able to go step by step through the process manually and say, like, here's the source code that we're having from page one. Here's our interaction with the page. Here's the resulting source code. Here's our next interaction with the page. Here's the resulting source code, and kind of feed that into the process so it could kind of have some eyes on it. Very helpful. And also, we were able to interact with Chrome in that sense too, and Claude was able to see exactly what we were seeing too as we were going through the process. So we were able to like debug alongside with that and really hone in on exactly what we need to get to do in order to get those events, the registrants on the events.
Yeah. My recent experience with Cloud Code, doing a similar job, was that Cloud Code running it on the desktop. It's able to pop up a window running the page you're trying to attract. He joins the network, he joins the event place, and recognize all the elements and say, "Oh, okay, here's what I see. You didn't give it to me, but I figured it out, so I'm gonna do the right job for you." It's
Yeah, it
crazy.
really is. It's crazy. And it is, I think it's probably one of the bigger tools when it comes to scraping. I think a lot of people are today, or at least I hear a lot of talk today about using AI to scrape data and to do research overall and to, essentially aggregate data. But I think like there are methods that we have used for, I don't want to say decades now, but for an extended amount of time at this point where we have been scraping data decently reliably and been using that in all different types of industries. And I think the interesting thing here is that the writing of those scraping processes and pulling the data and getting it organized into like a source of truth, as you were saying earlier, that was a complex part of the scraping process. Whereas today, Claude, a lot of these AI tools have really made that a lot easier in terms of the speed at which we can iterate and get it completely correct and like production ready. And that's really where I think is the big thing, because in the sense that AI is a black box at the end of the day and the results will vary, if we can use AI to speed up the process of creating a system that the results won't vary, that in my head from the engineering standpoint is probably the best outcome, and for most businesses would be too, because it's something that they can rely on a little bit stronger, there's no question. So, and I think that that's often missed though today in a lot of the conversations in AI and data scraping, is I don't often hear mentions of how we can use AI to speed up the prior processes we use
Mm.
and just improve upon them rather than reinventing the wheel in that regard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. Very good points, by the way. So,
Yeah, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah. Would you mind to get into the challenges here, because I see here in the screen how you describe it. How did you deal with that, with
Yeah,
each
so
challenge?
as far as this one, we ended up doing a function that would end up waiting for the results of the table. And again, this was tricky because we ended up having issues where a lot of the time we were hitting the restrictions that Naylor had in place. So this was kind of like the sweet spot that we found, that it ended up working enough to the point where we were satisfied with the results. And there were a few cases where we were still having searches come back empty as far as the script was concerned, But then when we go do them manually, we would end up seeing the results. And then we would went to a couple cases where we would side by side comparison the run through of the automation with like the console opened with Claude running the automation and grabbing screenshots at each stage as we would go through and do the exact same thing in like a separate container in the browser. And we were able to see that when we went through them and we gave it the extra second and a half, there were times where the results were coming back. So that allowed us to kind of like hone in on the timeline, at least for that. A lot of this stuff here, as far as checking the results and like digging all through this was a big help with Claude again, being able to take a look at the source code of the page, especially after our Ajax results came back and really understand what was there. Because initially we had loaded up the pages and we were pulling the source code directly like that. Instead, we were waiting until the end and kind of just grabbing the container that was getting updated by the Ajax and feeding that back over to Claude. So it like knew exactly what it was looking for. And if it didn't exist, it was like, we're not ready yet kind of deal. So we were able to kind of rhythm through the process that way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So like here, as we were waiting to get the content back,
Mm-hmm.
versus having to pull back our so it's like more so of like pulling for the data indicator rather than having to wait for DOM elements to load, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like for instance, with the listen nailer,
Mm-hmm.
at the bottom of the list, and a lot of systems will do this, of course, show like results X of X, and we were able to wait for that entries word was the word we were looking for as like the wake word into saying that the results were there. When there were no results in the nailer interface, it was just a empty table, headers, nothing underneath kind of thing. So also that was a big thing for us too. It was kind of unclear in the beginning, are these the results or not? We don't know if the search is even finished. And I think that was a lot of the hurdle we were hitting initially when we were writing out the automation process, is us even understanding what Nailer is doing, which there's really no documentation on. They don't really have a lot of information they share on how that system works. So that was a little bit of the tricky part on that, is us understanding and then kind of based on that knowing what to tell the script to look for, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we were able to we ended up just checking once a minute for the actual evidence of having data within the page. And if we didn't see that in the source element, then we knew that that wasn't the case. Now, there were times that we would have that timeout that would end up going into that retry like phase that I had mentioned earlier, retry status. So it was noted as being attempted. The result would be noted like in the database table. And then when it would finish up with the regular list that it would perform for that day, it would go back over to the list from the prior sync and see if there was any that are in that potentially might need to be reran status. And if so, it was kind of processed the exact same way, just reattempted. And I think what we had done was I think on the second failure, that's when it gets flagged and put over into the system and for a human to review.
Mm. So you keep the human in the loop at this level.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So at every level, we've kept human in the loop. So essentially, because the interaction with Nailer is so finicky or unreliable. And even again, to previous mention of us going through and getting different results at different times for the same searches we would manually be doing, we kind of knew at that point there's no way it's going to be 100%. But if it's having trouble, we know what trouble it's going to have, and we kind of know what we should do with that trouble. So in cases like where there was a lot of instances where trying to see if a user was already registered for an event or not, we would run the search with their name, no results would come back. And a minute later, you could try the same search again and they would show up in that list. So there were instances for like searches like that, we would perform them a few times just to be sure. Because when going through it manually ourselves, we saw that that was a concern with the data on their system's end. So we wanted to actually have the system do essentially what we would be doing as humans, doing it manually, run the search a couple more times, verify for sure before we go entering in a duplicate event attendee for that event.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. If you and right now the solution runs on a server as a service, right?
Yes, so this is all server ran. This is running on a server on DigitalOcean.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, very baseline server. There's not a lot of resources allocated to it. Uh, and essentially all that is again Laravel Laravel application framework running there from the PHP side. That is handling the scheduling of all of this stuff and the
Mm-hmm.
speaking with the database layer of all this stuff. And the database is really just used to keep track of everything and have like a intermediary area of storage. Because again, we're pulling the events from Cadmium, we're grabbing the attendees from that. So we need a place to store that and kind of structure it. We do that in that intermediary service here. That gets stored in the database layer. Laravel knows, hey, for at this time every night, we need to pull this, pull this, pull this, organize. And then once that's complete, we need to then start on the process of entering that data into the nailer system and track the progress on that as it goes on. So again, relied on Puppeteer and Node for that whole interactive bit with a nailer with the Rasa system, with the Cadmium system, since they have APIs and they're pretty standard, well documented, and mature. We're just able to use regular interfacing with Laravel for that, just like kind of like guzzle type thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
If you had to today to go and build the same solution, basically, let me paraphrase it. If you had today to go and solve the same problem, when we have more tools available from AI, more skills available into AI coming up. What would you change? Because I know when we build something, that's over. If it works, it's over. There's no reason to replace the solution with the new solution to solve exactly the same problem, because this doesn't have any business impact. Doesn't make any sense. It's just the engineering impact. So that's why I'm saying, if you had today to start solving the same problem, how would you approach it?
I think I would, and this might be a little bit of a stretch. I think I would try to attack it from a more visual standpoint. I think like
Mm.
with all the issues we faced with the nailer system providing us back with the results we were expecting, I'd rather see us essentially have it operate way more as a human, where instead of it
Mm.
having to pull code and look at the photo and read the results that are there. I think at this point, in my head at least, we're pretty gone pretty far in terms of like text recognition and being able to perform that translation from the technical side over to the process understanding exactly what it's looking at. And I think I'd probably like to address it in that regard because I think we probably would have faced less issues with the sessions and with like the limitation on requests per minute and that type of thing if it was essentially like we could just time it out where perform a search, wait a full minute, and then take a screenshot and then read the screenshot. Is this name found in this shot? Yes or no? They're registered or not based on that. I think also then that in that regard too, we could probably get away with outperforming a search where if there was a list of all of the registrants that are already in the event, being able to pull a shot of what the entire page would look like and not kind of limiting it to like a viewport and being able to just get that into some type of parser, AI driven, that could read the text and understand and then post a result back to the Laravel system, that would probably be more ideal because it is a lot of back and forth with this type of setup. And I think that speaks to a lot why we hit a lot of limitations in terms of how quick we can go through the list, even like that. So I think the
Mm.
visual part might slow down the parsing and understanding, but I think it probably in the run would speed up the process of actually getting the data to where it needs to be?
Mm. Okay, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense because in the platforms we had to join and get the data from or give back updates, um, you had big time delays. So you had to load the data, wait for that. It makes sense for all these steps.
And then the more steps, the more points of failure. And that's really
Of course.
where we ended up and in a lot of trial and error with trying to get the results how we wanted them to be, because as far as like the human walkthrough of it, pretty straightforward process overall. I mean, there's really
Yeah.
nothing super complicated about this. But in terms of getting the system to perform this and be reliable enough to where the client's happy with it and hey, there's one or two records here and there every other week that might need some manual adjustment, you know. at that, you need to get it to that stage too, because then at that point it's like they end up questioning why the time and money was spent doing this process to speed them up if it doesn't, so that's really the trickiest part with this, is trying to make it as reliable. And I think that's why I kind of go to more visual approach in my
Yeah,
head, because it probably would be a little more reliable than, at some cases, there's like, for the instance here where we were end up, polling all of that, the results here, we would have kind of eliminated this, and I would have just, determined, okay, here's our point at which we decide the results are done, take a shot, pull it, read it. We don't have to keep the session open. We don't have to keep interacting. There's all that little bit that we could have tried to avoid if that approach
mm,
was taken, I think. And honestly, I think if the project was started, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we probably would have tried that approach, but I think this was back in 2023 when this one started. So,
uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so you started 2023, you said?
Yeah, that was the
Good.
initial build of this project. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the initial build there again was that the Nailer interfacing with the Raza IO interface in terms of their API, getting the data from Nailer and putting it in. This system here was this was at the end of 2024 when we started doing the integration with Nailer in terms of writing the events and the event attendees over. That part really took a lot of time though from that standpoint, because there was again a lot of trial and error. I think it was about a month worth of, and it wasn't daily work or anything, but speaking with the client and kind of going through the process, and then us going through the process and finding points that might stand out in edge cases with some of the test data we had, walking through with them on that. Then like the initial build took about 4 months to get the initial build together to a point where we started running some sync. And we had it very limited at that point for quite some time, where we would run 5 contacts nightly, look at the results. And then after a few weeks of that, and we were happy, we had the client start looking at the results nightly after that, just bringing that scale up in double, just to like about 10, 15. And then from that point, the client was happy, and we just limited it to like 100 per day. Again, there was a lot of attendees that had to be synced over, so that was gonna take some time anyway if we had just left it that way. But I think we had about a week or two of that, and then once everybody decided that they were happy and everything seemed to be reliable enough, we were just like, let it run as many as possible per night. And I think the system overall, the most I've seen it go through was on the first integration side, which similar process, about 100,000. That was at the start time. On the later point of getting through like event attendees, I saw a few thousand go
Mm,
through nightly, and especially at the first point of when we had turned it on, there were still a lot of records to be brought over. That's when you saw a lot of those. So time-wise, it was handling it very well. Definitely way more than a person could have handled in that amount of time, doing it manually. And that run process took about 2, 3 hours face to face. So, like in terms of grabbing all the data from the Cadmium system, parsing, understanding, and then doing the interaction with Nailer every night. So it wasn't a huge thing. And at one point, they wanted us to increase that to run 3 times a day. So I think actually now it's running 4 times a day. But we wanted to speed up the process of the sync. That way, as soon as registrants were coming in, they were ending up in the Nailer system a lot quicker. Um, Especially as events started getting closer and they were actually using this and getting through some events with it, they started to see, okay, if we want to put announcements out or this kind of thing with that, we want to make sure that we have everybody in the list that we have, especially as event time draws near. So,
mm, yeah, that makes sense too. What is interesting, I think it's worth to be mentioned here, is that you started working on this project almost 3 years ago, which is not that far, but from the technological improvements we see the most recent 3 years, it's very, very back into the past, right? Because we see strong changes coming up. For example, I was playing with a very challenging scraping project back in October. It was to get data from Spotify from artists. And this was the second time working on this project, because back into 2022, I guess it was with another friend of mine, we joined a similar project, accessing the same platform, Spotify for Artists, and we failed. We felt for 3, 4 months we were working on the project and we couldn't achieve it. We were able to log in successfully for one user, for the second user, but for the third user, it was a failure. Their system was so secure. Back in October, when I was trying to do that, I used Claude, Puppeteer, MCP server. So what was the experience was open my Claude desktop and say, look, open that page and follow my instructions. So Claude was responsible to follow my instructions to do the job and was failing to click the button to log in. Okay, after the login, it was able to do the job. It was able to fulfill email and password. That's good, but it wasn't able to click the button for login. It was weird. And 2 days now, I was playing with OpenClaw, right? The new trend. So I use OpenClaw. I have it because I don't have a Mac Mini or any Mac product. So I use also DigitalOcean. So I put it there to running, and I use it from my Slack and say, okay, go and do the job, and wasn't able to complete a couple of things for me. It required the cookie. I was able to send it the cookie into the chat, and it used my cookie into the browser OpenClaw has access to, and joined successfully. Cool. That's definitely not scalable. It was just an experiment. And today, reading all documentation, found that, and also with conversation with another guy, my friend Ray, he said that this cannot be done with machines out of Mac. You need Mac. And again, this will not be scalable to do it as a product for 2, 3, 7 artists. Forget about it. Not doable. And say, okay, I'm gonna give 30 minutes more, no more, just for the experimentation. And I went back to Claude. And I did exactly the October version, step by step, do what I want, what I'm telling you to do. I was doing that. I see the browser popping up, okay? So I can see. Today, it worked to click the button by itself. So it was able to click the button, the login, so it was able to open the page and get the data I want to take. Perfect. I said, now, that's cool. Now, check all the thread of our conversation and make it a skill. So we can save this skill in your memory. And every time I want to use it, I say, okay, take the skill Spotify artist and run it. And it's responsible to run it. I don't know how scalable it is. I don't know how it's going to work, but it was definitely worth it by the last 2.5 days working on that and pushing because it was an opportunity to learn that what has been changed so far from the AI features.
And it's,
Have you ever
I mean,
played with that?
yes, I was gonna say I haven't played with OpenClaw, but I was gonna
Ah,
say, I mean, it's amazing how far we've come in such a short time in that regard, because
yes.
I mean, a year ago, I mean, a little over a year ago, my like extent of working with AI in terms of using it within my workflow was to, I would hit a wall, take the challenge out of whatever was where the challenge was, put it
Yeah.
into something like ChatGPT and ask for some recommendations and then kind of manually go through the workflow. And then that escalating into it writing the code. And now it's built directly into a lot of the code bases we're working with, where we now have like a whole agent workflow built out for actually executing like support requests and tickets that clients, features they want to see implemented in projects. And now we're looking to expand that into like the full stand up of new projects with like design comps and stuff that, designers come up with and provide over to the client or they provide with us. So it's really crazy how far it's come in the last the year, even year and a half in terms of that. Because again, I mean, it's replacing a lot of our manual work and workflow, and it's opening up our time in terms of, pipeline, being able to execute quicker and get things out the door and look for more projects and opportunities. So very exciting in that regard.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
there.
haven't used OpenClaw. I mean, it sounds like you've had a good experience with it though, and I've had interested in testing it out myself.
Um, it's crazy how this innovation drives the opportunities. Things. What I love, by the way, for with OpenClaw is that you can ask it for something, and it can come back to you and say, "Look, I don't know how to do it. Do you want me to learn?" So it goes,
Oh
builds the
wow.
skill, yeah, and if you give it access on the internet, so it can run, do the search, come back, do the learning, self-learning, build the skill, and after a couple of seconds, will you receive on your Slack or on Telegram, WhatsApp, whatever you're using, say a message, "Hey Joe, now I know how to do it. Let's go to do it."
And I think that really speaks a lot to I feel that my best interactions with any type of AI is treating it very much and interacting with it very much how I would interact with somebody working for me, if that makes sense. Where
Yeah.
again, you want to be extremely specific into what the outcome is you want. Any type of like requirements for acceptance to be met are clearly defined. Any type of visual aid that can be prepared and provided is a huge help always. And then being able to kind of turn that into a step-by-step process, what would be an SOP, in order to actually just like continuously execute that. And to your point, just like that, it's becoming more human. It's taking that persona on, it seems, right? But at the same time, that is where we see the best outcome in interacting with it. And I think like I have good experiences vibe coding things or using AI in terms of assisting in my code writing, but I have good and bad, and depending on how I go to address it. I feel that at this point, putting a lot into like a single prompt, you get
Mm.
really far. But in terms of like debugging, being able to like work with it as like tell it exactly what you're experiencing, almost act like its tester, that usually I see like the quickest like road to completion in terms of getting something across the board. So I think like the general advice always is, like provide as much detail as you can in the prompts, as much, patterns that you want to see replicated, ensure that you can provide those with examples. Definitely see great outcomes with that in a short amount of time, in my experience, at least right now. But then when it comes time to like testing, debugging, and running through that loop, really taking the time to like hold its hand through it and kind of, I'm seeing this in the browser. Here's the code I'm seeing after I clicked on this or did this or typed this, and being really specific with it and providing logs. I mean, it's amazing how quick we can kind of like really get through a phase of the project where, I don't know, at least in my experience with a lot of projects, the big stuff kind of moves quick.
Mm.
You get to the ends of the project and there's all the little things that you're either tying up ends between to make everything align and work together well, or like a privacy policy page or a footer. It's always like these small things, accessibility of one button in the 11th hour, stuff like that, where you can kind of write that into an agent process now, and it knows at every point, hey, double check that, triple check that one, double check this, write the change log, and you know that it's all being executed because you're kind of watching it go through its process. So yeah, in terms of that, it is incredible.
Yeah, I think we cannot avoid the human in the loop
Agreed.
at all. And here is the opportunity to grow another skill, being the human in the loop. Because what I see is that more and more of our horrible tasks can be handled by AI agent, even if it is a scraping process that we can build an agent. For example, with the case you made, you can easily upload the entire project into Claude or whatever you're using, and can ask to build an agent who will be able to solve the problem that this workflow can solve. So then you have an agent. What is pros and cons? Of course, the agent will be responsible to make automatically some adjustments, because when the interface will change in those platforms, and you have three platforms talking with each other, right? One update in one of them will break the process, so we have to come back and find it manually and make the improvement, right? So if it is an agent and it has the skill to recognize what's broken and read the entire page by itself, and oh, this element is moved here, or this element is renamed, for example. Okay, let's take that. It will update the process and will run it. Then what you do as an AI agent manager is that you just talk with the machine and you track the results. And this thing is not like it's not so boring as it sounds, because you have to be very, very smart and think like the guy who's looking for the errors, to recognize the errors, because by default AI makes errors because it has statistics and works with statistical error. By default, you're gonna find something, and this is the opportunity to push the machine even more to give you final results. This is my thought for how the things will change after 3 to 6 months.
And I think you bring up a really good point too, because I mean, a lot of issue in data scraping is when changes are made to the system. And I mean, just going back to the point of maybe approaching this from visualization before, could even be at a
Mm,
point now where we can have a sample of how the site looks and it can detect very early on when something has changed. So instead of us waiting for some, at times for some systems like this where the synchronizations are kind of behind the scenes and no one's really thinking about it too much. I mean, if someone's on vacation, a week or two could go by before anybody's aware something broke in the process. And then by the time a ticket gets opened and everything gets looked at and we just do the discovery we need to, and we find out, oh, like to your point, they moved the button.
mm.
AI might even be able to start to recognize that soon enough and where it can update the script process in order to get around that. Or again, just flag it for us as soon as possible. Site has changed. We might, updates need to be made. It's failing for XYZ reason, and then kind of flag that for us and give us an opportunity to go in there and adjust. So,
Yeah, it's fascinating what is coming up. And the cool thing is that the horrible problems can be solved very easily. So we
yeah.
can focus on the problem of innovation. And I see here the need for human to be more innovative and more creative, because machines can do the horrible part of our jobs. And most of us who are in the middle of our career, actually, we have consumed too many hours working into horrible tasks and boring tasks, that we are very glad that today we have agents doing the job.
Yes, it's very true. And I think really speaks a lot to human in the loop and really the experience of that human I do feel is still important because I mean, especially when dealing with client work, you do see a lot of time like the person who is closest to the client project is going to be able to better orchestrate what the AI is doing in terms of that project because I've seen plenty of instances where we'll turn something over to a framework that we're using with agents and it can take a look and it has a completely different understanding of why something is being done the way it is. But then once you explain to it why that is the reason, it really can take it pretty far. But again, human needs to be in the loop at that point because they might not understand the intricacies, or the AI should say, should not might not understand the intricacies of why something was done the way it was done. The human kind of needs to steer in that direction, and would know, hey, we might have a component there for this. Like it's the first thing that it turned out when looking for an update, but it didn't realize it needed to really update something on a page on a component. So there's
Mhm.
still those instances where errors could occur. And I'm sure it'll get better and refined in time, but at least at this point, super important to have a human in the loop. And even if it's just a set of eyes and approver, I mean, imagine like think of it as a PR approver on a GitHub, PR, same idea there. And in that sense, we're just another set of eyes to look through and give approval on.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And I'm pretty sure this is gonna be the future skill for us as human beings. Thanks, Joe.
100% right.
We are on the end of the hour. Thanks a lot for sharing all these incredible experiences and your approach in doing the data scraping. Thanks, Rafael, for joining us today. If you have any question, you can bring it into the chat. And otherwise, we can close and join the upcoming weekend.
Yes, thank you very much, Dimitri and Raphael as well. Hope
Thanks.
this is some valuable information for you all.
It was
Okay, good.
definitely
All right, good.
great.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks.